Hey folks, thank you for joining me for another lesson. I'm glad to have you back here. Today we're going to be cheating perspective. As promised, I told you I'd make a video to follow up the perspective videos I've made already. We still have to get into 4-point and 5-point perspective, but before we learn all that, we should learn how to really manipulate and work within our 1, 2, and 3-point perspective knowledge. So before we begin, make sure you click the wolf below there and subscribe. If you haven't already, like and comment, because I want to know if these videos are making an impact on you, and I want to know what you'd like to learn as well, so I can add to the lesson section here on the channel. If you're not following me on Instagram, Reddit, or Twitch, please do. It's all Christian Wolf art across the board, one word. Go check out the stuff that I've been posting there, and come check me out 3 nights a week on Twitch. So without any further ado, let me get in today's lesson, which I said is cheating perspective, all right, or cheating perspective. We are going to use 2 examples today. First one is it's not even really a cheat, but it's something you should know, and it kind of touches on the X marks the spot lesson I provided in the perspective videos. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but I believe I mentioned at one point X marks the spot as one of my things to note. So we're going to use a lot of that today, and this is my first example here in the pyramids. So let's get right into it. When you're drawing a pyramid, you might be wondering, well, are those lines that form the pyramid to the square shape that it rests upon, are they going to a perspective point as well? No, they're not. This is a simple case where you can cheat easily and achieve an effect. So what you're doing essentially is this, and I'll drop in the lines behind the drawing. You've got a horizontal line, you've got 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, alright? 2-point perspective grid. We'll use this big pyramid as an example. We've drawn it in space here, according to our map, right? And like I taught you in videos before, I've actually formed an X on the surface area of the pyramid. And to form the pyramid, all I've done is find that center point, and I draw a vertical line from that point in the surface. I draw a vertical line from that point in the surface straight up, because I'm in 2-point perspective and all my lines are straight up and down. And where I decide I want the pinnacle of the pyramid to be, I draw points right back to the 2 sides of the pyramid that are exposed to my eye. And then when I remove it, and I remove the perspective drawing in behind, I'm left with a pyramid shape. Okay? And that's how I get the accuracy on my diagonal lines that form the pinnacle of the pyramid. Okay? Why is it important that I'm teaching you the X's? I'm going to show you now. So today's fun example I'm going to use is the Sphinx. How appropriate, right? Pyramids and the Sphinx, all ancient architecture. Perfect examples of how we can cheat perspective. Okay? So first and foremost, when we're looking at something like this, I'm going to take away the color layer. I'm going to take away the line layer, all right? And we're going to just look at the schematics, all right? We're looking at something we probably recognize, right? It's a drawing in 2-point perspective. All of its horizontal lines in accordance to where they're going in space. We've got some dimensional playing fields, though, that we're not used to, right? We've got more or less a human face on a 3-quarter pose, but it's built into kind of a pyramid type of shape. That's his headpiece, which is resting on another rectangular piece, which is resting on another box, which is resting on another box. So what I did here to kind of show you what's going on is I broke it up into boxes, okay? So that's kind of how you want to think of the complexity of the dimension of the Sphinx, okay? Sphinx has a lot of different volumetric and dimensional playing fields in its entirety of its structure, okay? There's parts that are narrow, there's parts that are coming out, there's parts that are in. So if you can break up Sphinx's body with shapes in accordance to how it's drawn in perspective, you can start to get these interesting volumetric playing fields, okay? And it really looks like it's sitting there in space, right? Now, what I taught you before about the X's, those X's are how I'm getting a lot of these, the X's that I've taught you before are exactly how I'm getting symmetry between the furthest side of the Sphinx and the side of Sphinx that's closest to us, okay? That's how I'm getting equal spacing between his paws here in the foreground. That's how I'm getting equal spacing right there. That's how I'm getting this shape and this shape to actually be the exact same shape, just drawn, you know, one closer than the other. This one's obviously further away from our view, so it's smaller. But in all actuality, this shape right here is the exact same size and is the exact same shape as this one here. So, to give you an example of how I'm doing this, all right? If I take away this drawing here, and I just go back to my schematics, what I'm doing for you is this. I'm saying there's a box here, straight up and down for the vertical lines, and when I figure out that shape and what that shape encompasses, the next logical thing is to find its center point, draw all the points back to the perspective vanishing point, cross over anything that might be going back this way. Do the same thing on the side, find an end, complete my shape, find a center point, and start building things off of that. So that box alone, and I would even go as far as to draw through it. Draw through it, know where all those points are on every side of the box. So now you can start stemming everything from it. You can say, well, I want these paw-shaped boxes right here to meet right there, and where they cross over is right here. And then from that point right there where you brought this line, you can draw another line back this way to your vanishing point and find the exact point where this line begins over here, and it continues out. All right? Or you could do that a different way. You can do what I did in that example before, and you can just draw a box right out in front of it, and you can go from there and try to figure out where that box fits in accordance to where it meets up with this box, where this box meets with this box. Okay? And then from there, you draw it in, you find your center points, and you start breaking that box up to do what you want it to do. If that's where you want, if this shape right here is where you want that paw and arm to be, you find the center points of that in accordance to where it is with this huge box right here, and you can break up those shapes. So if that's the edge of the paw, you draw that back to your perspective point. You find that exact same point, right? You draw it down. It meets a point right here. You draw that point back to the other vanishing point. It gives you another point right here. You draw that straight up, and then that point goes back to your other vanishing point over here. Okay? And now you've got these areas that are equal. Does that make sense? There's another X. Okay, and that's exactly how I did every single box and every single volumetric dimension on this shape of the Sphinx here. And all you have to do is look at this schematic here to see how everything falls in line. Now, you ask yourself, where does the cheating come into play, right? Well, this is where I cheat the perspective. And I'm going to show you using my line drawing here, okay? And we'll draw over top of that. So examples of where we cheated are right here in the pause, for example. Okay? This is kind of like the simple rule of thumb. So right here, I drew a line. And I have each of the digits of the Sphinx's pause starting on that line. And what they do is they come from this perspective where they're drawing to that vanishing point, and they curve down into the straight line up and down, which I've made all vertical lines on my drawing already do, right? So where did I cheat the perspective? It's right in here, where the paw goes curvy. From flat to curvy to flat again, right? That's me cheating perspective. And that's where your drawing skills come into play, all right? Where you're able to differentiate the volume and dimension between your two playing fields, which are formed by your perspective grid, okay? And I did the same thing with this paw right here, all right? Cheat all those little lines, but they're necessary. Don't you see? They pull out of perspective and back into perspective. All right? I did the same thing with the face here. Now, first off, with the face, I created a shape. And from that shape, I created a center point. And from that center point, I figured out where I wanted the head to go. See what I'm doing there? I'm creating these equal spots to find out exactly where I want my head to go. All right? And then I took photos of Sphinx because I can't remember exactly what he looks like. And I looked at a lot of photos. I looked at 3/4 versions of the Sphinx, okay, so I could get a good read on his face. And then I articulated it in there. And this is where your drawing skill comes in. And that's what cheating is. This is where your drawing meets the perspective, okay? And if you look at Sphinx's head, it protrudes off of that shape. And on a 3/4, the human face has almost like an S-curve angle to it, where the top of the brow here meets the cheekbone, and it protrudes, and it comes out, and you meet the chin, and the chin comes out, and it meets the throat, and the throat comes out and lines with the center of the shape I drew it off of. And I eventually come to the other side where I start to form the brow and the angles of that side of the brow, because I drew it on a 3/4, and I pull the last of the angles back to the point of the chin, and then back into the statue, back into that flat surface and behind, and back into the center. All right? And I've literally built this thing off of that center point of that surface area, and that's exactly how I achieved this look here. And that is what cheating perspective, in a sense, is an example of, or an example of cheating perspective is just that. All right? Another thing to note, the eyebrow, okay? I drew that on a perspective line. I drew his cheekbones on a perspective line. I drew his mouth and his chin on a perspective line. And you see those fraying? They're all fraying back to that vanishing point on the right side of the perspective here, or the composition here. And we'll get into 3/4ing, human faces so that things like this become a little easier for you to manipulate. But the mouth. Everything's following those lines. All right? That's what's helping to give the illustration of Sphinx here such form and believability, right? I even drew in some like little stick figures in there to kind of give it some scale, right? Because we know the Sphinx is this gigantic structure. Anyhow, I hope that makes sense. Those are my examples using Sphinx here. Anything else I would say would be just how you formulate your line drawings around your around your Sphinx here. If you look at the Sphinx, in actuality, this shoulder / beginning of his chest piece here, it's got dimensional levels to it as it kind of angles up. It's on this kind of an angle, right? Slightly diagonal. And then it kind of bevels in, bevels out, bevels in, bevels out, bevels in, bevels out, bevels in. And it's an old structure, so it's worn down. So that's what I wanted to give it kind of that look that it's, you know, been weathered. Each of those lines, if you really want to get technical, okay, when they jut out this way to form the lip, all right, that subtle line that's jutting out this way should follow the perspective point on this side. Just like this line right here, this line right here are going back to the perspective point over here. All right? All my vertical lines in this 2-point perspective drawing, straight up and down, all the way through the drawing, unless I don't want it to be straight up and down. And at that point, I can articulate angles to other volumetric points. Another thing to note here, when we're drawing illustrations, we're using overlaps, and we're using clear overlaps. You know, this overlap wouldn't be as effective, like the elbow of his arm here, overlapping this indent where his torso is, you know, thinner and tapered in from where his elbow is and where his feet are. You want those overlaps to read nice and clear. And, you know, where you cheat the perspective and where you overlap, you want that to be nice and clear so you can articulate to your viewer what's happening. This foot in the back, I want these lines where they break apart to break ever so slightly but follow perspective lines going back to here, right? I want this right in here to go back to that perspective point. I want this little nudge, or sorry, this little edge right here where his, I guess it would be his knee. I want that to even fall in accordance to perspective. All right? I want all of those things to fall in accordance all the way through, right to the front of the right to the front of the composition, right to the back, right from the top, right to the bottom. And I want to consciously make notes that I have interesting overlaps. You know, this wouldn't look interesting if this line right here, if this line right here, the side of his and bottom of his torso, lined up perfectly with this right here. You would form this ugly tangent, and you wouldn't get much of a read on the space differentiation. It's more interesting to your viewer that you show some space in there. So play with the perspective, cheat lines where you have to, make your overlaps nice and clear and interesting. You know, this gap right in here is nice. And I worked hard for that. I didn't have that the first couple drawings I did. It looked really wonky. But this gap right in here, where we show that there's this huge space, like 40 feet, 20 feet in between there. You know what I mean? If I would have pushed this line right here up any higher, it would have either it can overlap here, but it's more interesting if it overlapped like that. Do you see what I'm saying? It'd be more interesting. However, you don't want to form a tangent and have those lines overlap right here where the bottom of the furthest paw starts. Do you know what I mean? That's why I gave it that gap. That's why there's this little hint of space in between here. All right? And that just makes your composition more interesting, believable, lifelike, okay? These are just things to note. That's not exactly cheating perspective. Where cheating perspective comes in is where you basically start to use perspective in the backgrounds of your illustrations. And I keep stressing, go back to your comic books, go back to all your great references and start looking for these examples. Start tracing over top of them, start copying them into your sketchbooks, break them down into a mathematical equation and make this stuff work for you. It's got to work, right? Because so many professionals and so many businesses use these tricks over and over and over to achieve the final product. That's why you're looking at, like, when you look at something that's professional, it's usually rooted in all of this stuff. So anyways, I always go on too far with these videos, and I don't get enough feedback to know if my lessons are even sinking in. We'll keep this one at 20 minutes today, and hopefully you took away some really good stuff. Hopefully this makes perfect sense to you. I want you to actually try drawing Sphinx in this perspective for your own knowledge. You know, I couldn't think of a better example. When I came across the Sphinx yesterday when I was drawing the pyramids, I was like, hey, that's a great example of how to cheat perspective. You've got the rectangle in there. You've got squares, triangles, you've got all these different shapes comprising what is the Sphinx, you know what I mean? And to draw it to scale and all that, I can touch on all those videos later on, but for now, if you can just understand everything I've taught you up until this point and how it works in conjunction with your actual illustration skills, you know, that's your illustration skills. They come into perspective in order to cheat it, in order to manipulate things. But you're using perspective always to give your stuff form and root it in actual 3D space, which mimics what we are always perceiving, right? Anyway, thanks for stopping in. Make sure to hit the wolf. Subscribe if you have not. Check me out on Twitch, Reddit, and Instagram, all at Christian Wolf Art. I'm having a lot of fun doing these. I hope you guys are having a lot of fun learning. So, see you next time. Have a great day.